Hello YouTube! It's time for another episode of the Tarot Study Series, and we're going to be talking about the High Priestess today. Now, I'm going to apologize in advance. I'll probably be looking down here at my notes fairly frequently because I actually have a lot to say about this card and this archetype in the major arcana. When we talked about the Magician, I gave kind of a key phrase for the Magician as being supported flow, and I think the I'm going to do a similar thing with the High Priestess. I would say that her key phrase is trust yourself, which self-trust, just like the High Priestess, seems like a simple concept, but it's not really. It is a lot of work. And so just like the High Priestess, when I first met her in my tarot study, she seemed pretty simple. I was like, okay, got it. Intuition, pretty simple concept. But then it definitely got more complicated as I studied her more. And as I studied the rest of the tarot more. I think because it's like, okay, High Priestess is about intuition, but she's not the Queen of Cups. She's not the Moon. She's only in the first line of the majors. She has a lot of information, but she's not the Hierophant, and she's not the Hanged One. She's not the Hermit. Excuse me, not the Hanged One. The Hanged One is not what I was thinking of there. She's not the who's using H's? It's like all the H's. Yeah, she's not the Hierophant. She's not the Hermit. So who is she exactly? A sidebar, by the way, on pronouns. I at first was trying to like use they for every card to sort of reinforce the idea that none of the cards in the tarot are specifically gendered. They can represent many things. And I'm pulling back from that a little, only because to me, like, sometimes they have particular energies and I just like a different pronoun feels right. I mean, not everyone has the pronoun they. And my hope is that as a non-binary reader and somebody who talks a lot about queer stuff and trans stuff, non-binary stuff on this channel, that it will be clear that I understand that, you know, gender is fluid and can be represented in all ways through all the cards. And so when I use, like, if I use a she pronoun or he pronoun, particular card, it's really not intended to suggest that you should use that pronoun or that should be your conception of it. It's just as I've gotten to know the cards, sometimes particular pronouns come to mind, sometimes they shift, sometimes I'll alternate them, so just ascribe no meaning to pronouns throughout this series. But anyway, so who is the High Priestess? So she is in the first line, and I think this is something that's in general interesting, like, about, or something that I have been exploring about the majors, but maybe also about the court cards a little bit, is what does it mean? What is the placement of a card in order in the tarot? Which order? But what does it mean? And so at first I think it was a little confusing to me because she seems very ancient and wise and is this archetype, and yet she's in the very first line of the majors. But I think that placement in no way takes away from the ancient wisdom that she holds, but the lesson that she offers about going in and going deep is so fundamental that it needs to show up early for the Fool on their journey, and you need to learn from a master. So this is where, like, I think it can be helpful to separate out the archetype of the card, like the person that you're seeing, the archetype that's represented in the card, and the medicine that it offers or what you're supposed to take from the card. So, like, it comes early as a fundamental lesson for the reader embodied in the Fool, although we know that the Fool's journey is not a straight line. I'll talk about that in a second. But it is, the High Priestess herself is very much, I think, master level, ancient wisdom. I love depictions of the High Priestess as somebody older, but she can also be kind of timeless. And this brings me to something about mastery in the tarot in general, the concept of mastery. I've been pulling up a lot of cards, especially the King of Pentacles, that to me really signal mastery or talk about mastery. Also cards like the Eight of Pentacles or some of the Tens. Like, to me, so this was something that I had to think about. How, in what ways am I mastering my life? But I'm also in my 30s. I'm not, not done. And so this has challenged me to rethink about what mastery means in the tarot, because it is not a straight line. And the tarot really, I think, challenges us to think about time and journeys differently, because it is sporadic, it is messy. You can feel like a child and like a master at various points in time through your life and through the tarot. And it is possible to be very young and very wise, as some of the pages, I think, represent. And it's also possible to be a very old student, right? An elderly, like chronologically elderly student. You could read, if you wanted to, you can read the Fool's Journey as saying that when the Fool first meets the High Priestess, they have to learn the lesson and they don't necessarily understand intuition, and then as they go through all the majors, they get to the point in the world where they have learned everything, they've embodied it, internalized it, absorbed, integrated it, and then when they come back around to the High Priestess the next time, that they kind of are the High Priestess, they can embody the High Priestess, they sort of become the High Priestess. But and I think that can happen, and that is one way to think about it, but I think there's also more to it than that, because the tarot is not a circle, it's a spiral, or it's a wavy line, or it's a nebula, like whatever you need it to be. I think what's so cool about the Fool, and the Fool being 0, is that the Fool doesn't have a position. The Fool, it can be counterintuitive, I think, particularly to like white European people. The idea of like, it doesn't really have a number. It's everything and nothing. It's the Fool pervades and moves through the other cards, not in a linear way and not in a directed path. And so part of that for me is that the High Priestess as an archetype, I think, really pervades the entire tarot. I think, intuition is so key to the practice of tarot, and if you want to get a bit meta, I think a lot of people will identify with the High Priestess as tarot readers, consider the High Priestess to really be a tarot reader archetype, particularly people who identify as women or femme, identified in some way, or vibe a lot with kind of lunar energies, may relate to the High Priestess. So, she can kind of be the tarot reader themselves. And I also find her to be in a lot of the other cards. She is this key kind of lunar archetype. So all the like more kind of lunar or watery cards. So the Moon, the Hanged One, I think I accidentally said that earlier. The Hanged One as like kind of a Neptunian energy, a watery energy. She comes through, for me, actually, in all the queens. So, not that the queens necessarily have to be feminine, but like there is, I think, the High Priestess in each of the queens. So she embodies the kind of ultimate witch energy of the Queen of Wands. She is the really grounded, self-determined comfort of the Queen of Pentacles. She is, to me, the sharp boundary of the Queen of Swords. She has part of her kind of mystery or secretiveness is that she can set her own boundaries and create zones of privacy. And of course, she is the Queen of Cups with that deep, deep intuition. So she is not just the second card in the majors. I think she is throughout. And so yeah, I think you do want to, that is sort of a meta commentary, but you do want to separate the High Priestess as an archetype from the medicine that she offers. So her medicine is very fundamental, but she is very complex. I think part of her whole thing when the Fool encounters her, when you encounter the High Priestess, when you're introduced to the High Priestess, you don't know her yet. And in some ways, I think when you get to the moon is almost a deeper introduction to the High Priestess, because the moon, when you meet the High Priestess, she's very mystery. She's kind of veiled in some ways, and you get to the moon, and it's like, the secret is me. Like, I am the mystery. You go really deep and learn your own secrets in a way. But to get past some of this, like, general meta stuff and into, like, what does the High Priestess mean in a reading? What does she offer? Michelle T calls her the most feminist card in the tarot. She's very witchy. T talks about how she represents banished knowledge, and it's a very feminist thing, and like solo practice. And I love that solo practice thing. A lot of people talk about the idea of the Vestal Virgin, which when I first heard it, I had this like instinctive negative reaction, because one, virginity is a construct, and two, it sounded kind of churchy to me. I don't know why. Maybe I'd heard about Vestal Virgins in some sort of a churchy context, but in any event, what that actually means is it's the idea of a woman unto herself. So it's not like the construct of sexual virginity. It's the idea of a woman who is by and for herself. And even though I don't identify as a woman, I very much identify as being a person who is by and for herself. So this resonates really strongly with me. I think also, like, when she comes up in a reading, she's really saying, do not make a decision yet. Be still. Use your intuition to know when it's time to make a decision. The answer is within you, and you may have to do some inner work to find it if it's not yet obvious. A lot of times the High Priestess comes up, the answer is not obvious. You can compare her to a few other cards there. Like, I think there's some similarity to the Hermit in terms of that inner journeying, though the Hermit feels a little more active to me, or a little more like, sometimes maybe longer term, though not always. Whereas the High Priestess really feels like meditation. And already knowing the answer, even though you don't know you know it, rather than like seeking for or journeying for the answer. She's a little similar in this way to the Hanged One, but I think the Hanged One is more about discomfort and stillness, and really like being still beyond the point that it's comfortable, and a perspective shift. Whereas the High Priestess to me is, again, more you already know the answer. You don't necessarily need to shift, you just need to uncover something. And the Moon, I keep mentioning, I mean, I think these two are very related, but the Moon, I think it's a little deeper in terms of the medicine that what it's asking you to do. So it's not necessarily a deeper card, but the Moon, I think, it asks you to really like confront your fears and go super deep and like really get into the tough stuff. The High Priestess, in some ways, to me, is more accessible in terms of what it's asking you to do, because it can be as simple as just going still and clearing space to listen. So it's not about action, but it is about kind of growing the power to act in the future. It's the nature of this card is very mindful, very slow. It's about listening to yourself. It's about problem solving, not through intellect and communication like the Magician, but through intuition. So this is like meditating on a problem versus trying to whiteboard it out. Like, it's not using the mind to understand it, but it's kind of using the spirit. I think you can contrast, again, like when you think about the Magician, right, you have a Mercury. So thinking, communication, intellect, broadcasting. When you think of the High Priestess, you have the Moon. It's a very different energy. It's emotional, spiritual, internal, stillness, watery energy. Lindsay Mack talks about the Magician versus the High Priestess as the High Priestess is about going down and in rather than up and out. And I think that simple visual, down and in, up and out, can be a really good way to understand those two cards. You can also think about how the Moon is about cycles and knowing the right time. So I'm not going to go here into the kind of like blood mystery menstrual stuff, because honestly it's kind of triggering or dysphoric to me to talk about. So other people have definitely done that. There is some of that in the High Priestess. It's just not something I connect to. But I do connect to the cyclical nature of the moon and the idea that, like, you cannot rush the moon. The moon is going to do its own thing, but it's always going to keep coming back to each phase. And I think the High Priestess has a lot to do with timing and not rushing it, and patience, knowing the right time. It's also not a card that is about research or advice or getting external answers. Again, you know the answer. When you pull this card, you know the answer. It might not be obvious to you. It might feel very, you can often get this card when you're feeling very like, I don't know, I have lots of choices. It is a 2, so like duality, having multiple options, but what the High Priestess is telling you is that you know the answer, you're not honing in on it yet, and you need to listen to yourself. So you need the external quiet to be able to hear. If you have attention issues, ADHD, or similar things like I do, I think it can be very hard, or sensory issues, anything that like really distracts you and that you experience stimulus different from other people. You may find that the High Priestess energy challenging because it does require this kind of going quiet to be able to hear the answer from yourself. And often when you get this card, you really feel like you just want the tarot to tell you. Like, you just want an answer. So it can be frustrating if you're trying to make a decision and you want an answer and you get the High Priestess. It's like, no, like, you don't need advice. You know it. And if you do have these challenges with stimulus or sensory stuff or attention stuff, keep in mind meditation doesn't have to be still and completely silent. Honor your own brain chemistry. Your brain chemistry is right for you. So it might be walking meditation. It might be doing something that gets you into a state. It may even be like that you need a certain amount, maybe music or some kind of stimulus to be able to reach the place where you can access your intuition. But having any of these disabilities or like differences, it does not mean that you're not intuitive. Everyone is intuitive. Everyone can access the High Priestess. She is an archetype for everyone. And so, I really want to extend my heart to you. If you felt that she is inaccessible because some of these things, I felt that too, but know that intuition is for everyone. It just doesn't look the same for everyone, and it may not feel obvious the way it's sometimes presented, but you can find the way to listen to yourself, because it's yourself you need to listen to exactly the way you are, not anyone else. Again, you have the answer with this card. She does also, I think, have an association with dreams, the subconscious kind of collective memory. She is the keeper of memories. It kind of makes me think of, I'll try to talk about this in a non-spoilery way, but if you do like Game of Thrones, it's a little about how in the last season of Game of Thrones, again, not going to spoil, but how they talk about story and history. So the way they talk about particular character as holding collective history and memory, and how important that is, and how we almost don't exist if we don't have that collective memory. The High Priestess is that. The High Priestess holds that. So when you get the High Priestess, you need to believe that you have the power to access something collective, something that's below the surface. We all have that power. We are all part of that collective. No matter how much we are actively engaged in communicating with it, but we all touch on the collective. And the collective is not, by the way, just humans. It is all people, trees, plants, animals, mountains, rocks, everything has a collective memory. Another part of the High Priestess is just realizing that your potential as a person is not just what you're aware of. So if you're feeling kind of down or depressed or imposter syndrome or any of those things, and you pull the High Priestess, I think it's a great reminder that you have that mastery feeling within you. You may feel like you're very beginner's mind with this, but you are also at the very same time a master of your own intuition, and you have potential beyond what you realize. So she asks you to go beyond what's obvious when looking at a problem or an issue or topic. When you're thinking about the question that you pose to the tarot, there may be some memory that you need to access that isn't coming up for you right away. And there might be different ways that you could try to tap into that, whether it's through music or certain smells or spiritual practices or whatever it is for you. I think it's important that I think this like collective memory thing or subconscious thing is maybe a little more accessible than some of the more esoteric or occult meanings. If you look at the Smith Rider-Waite, like she does have and you can read about a lot of like very specific Kabbalah stuff and like esoteric meanings, but if you notice like the Torah, for example, in that depiction of the High Priestess, it's symbolic. It's not necessarily telling you that you need to like go out and do occult study right now. It's more like a symbol of that collective wisdom or collective memory or a keeper of story or history. And I think if we contrast, we'll talk next in the next video about the Empress, but if we contrast the High Priestess and the Empress, you know, she's not necessarily, the High Priestess is not necessarily somebody who's going to nurture you or care for you, but you have to do that for yourself in this card, but she will hold space for you. She's a very non-judgmental holder of space. So sometimes when you get this card, that's what you need, is just the space to be with. So given all that, some examples that I like of the High Priestess, none of these are very like super traditional, because everybody can Google the Smith Rider-Waite version. So this is the Diviner from the Numinous, which is a renamed High Priestess. I love this cosmic energy, the feel. There's a zodiac wheel behind a High Priestess in this card. You've got kind of third eye imagery and bells. It's very different from the traditional, but at the same time I think evokes some of the same things around intuition with the third eye, around some of the esoteric with the zodiac, and I love that cosmic kind of feeling that she is like beginning and end and kind of everything. This is a very different take from the Tarot of the Silicon Dawn. So this really plays on the duality. This deck is very like technology futuristic, so you can see that effect. This is from my first tarot deck I ever got. This is the High Priestess in the Starry Cauldron, and I love that kind of haunting feeling of her. It's very solitary. This is from the Triple Goddess. I like the I was gonna say camera angle. I like the angle here. Looking down from above and the kind of lily pads. Again, there's kind of both space and water imagery there. And finally, I love this one from the Next World Tarot. The kind of Afro-Caribbean feel. To me, could be more accessible if you're somebody who the like Judeo-Christian stuff isn't working. This is a different kind of referencing to traditional knowledge. I like that there's still the pomegranates, but there's this pile of pomegranates behind this figure in such a lush environment. It really has this feeling of abundance, but you've got, you know, the moon, the candles, so it feels witchy. It feels it just feels really lovely and accessible, and like I want to be there, whereas I think sometimes the High Priestess can feel a little closed off. So yeah, there you go. Leave a comment below if you have thoughts or questions about the High Priestess, and we'll see you in the next Tarot Study Series video.